Hi everyone, welcome back to Brand 2020. It is November 14th, 2017. You know, here on Brand 2020, we talk about Japan's attempts to project its image overseas and also to the people who live here in Japan, not only the Japanese citizens, but to the foreign nationals who live and work here. One of the things that is an irritant for the image of Japan is this constant story of bashing, of bullying, and that's the issue we're going to focus on today. Today, my guest is Glen Wood, who is the head of global sales at Mitsubishi UFJ Morgan Stanley. Hello, Glen.
Hi, Timothy.
Thanks for coming on the show.
It's good to be here.
You're in a difficult situation, aren't you? You had a son, and as a result of having a son, when you announced being with child, the company decided that you weren't the kind of employee they wanted anymore.
Yeah, that's right, Timothy. It's actually a shocking story, and I've heard many issues like this in the past, but when it happened to me, frankly, I was very surprised.
You know, it's a frequent story that we hear that children are bullied. You know, the Japanese children who go overseas with their father on an extended visit or an assignment, and then they come back, they're bullied by their classmates. Or more frequently, the foreigners come in, or half foreign, come back into Japan, and they're bullied by their classmates. But this method of socialization and of trying to create a kind of conformed society doesn't stop at junior high school or high school. It goes all throughout the corporate structure as well, doesn't it?
That's right, Timothy. And unfortunately, it's not conducive to 21st century global corporate management. Mm-hmm. And it's a lesson, I think, that many Japanese corporations have to learn. And that's one of the reasons I'm standing up. I firmly believe that it's a human right for people to be able to have children and raise children and continue their career.
Right. This isn't a program or a story where we're bashing Japan or we're pointing at things that we don't like. This is it's such a strange issue. When I first read about your story, I thought, you know, there is maternity harassment, which people hear quite a bit, where one of the secretaries or one of the executives who happens to be female gets pregnant, and then all of a sudden she gets signals and stink eye and a little bit of pressure, and eventually she's kind of forced out so that she can have her baby in peace. In your particular situation, you're a single guy, you had a baby, then the company said, no, you're not supposed to have a baby, you're not even supposed to be pregnant, you're supposed to be working for me all the time. What the hell do you do?
Yeah, no, it's interesting you mentioned the plight of women in particular, because obviously it's the majority of women that need to take paternity leave that get harassed in this way. And it's evident in the numbers. You know, if you look at management in Japan, there's only 6% of women who are in management positions in Japan, and more than 50% of Japanese corporations have no women in management. So, in my case, obviously, I was shocked that I was pushed aside and I was segregated and discriminated against because I had a baby.
I understand that your son just had his second-year birthday last week, right?
That's correct.
So that means that this issue that you've had has gone on for 3 years because, what, 8, 9 months of gestation, and apparently you told your bosses, guess what, I'm going to have a baby, and that's when this whole mess started.
Yeah, that's correct, and it was a shocker. It was night and day from the time I mentioned that I was going to have to take some time off. It was a very difficult pregnancy, and the doctors informed me that I would need to be there. And so it was clear that I would need to take some time off, and from the minute I mentioned that to management, many wouldn't look at me anymore.
That's just crazy. I mean, you are, you've been here for 30 years. You speak Japanese. You're very well acknowledged throughout the community, and particularly in this very rarefied industry where you are, where it's equities. Not very many people do that. And you've been doing it for your whole career. You were at Goldman Sachs. You were at Mizuho. You were at Deutsche Bank, right?
That's correct.
So why would they do that just because you say, boss, guess what, I'm going to have a baby?
Yeah, it's very puzzling, and in fact, you know, this is part of why I'm standing up, because there's so many people that face this issue. That it's one, very inefficient. Japan is facing a demographic issue.
Right.
They're facing a shortage of labor, and this is potentially an answer to one of Japan's problems, right? Mm-hmm. People need to be able to have children and come back to work. People need to be able to get sick, for example, and come back to work. And often these things just are not permitted in Japan.
So even though you're still an employee, you're not at work, they've kind of frozen you out?
That's right. So they've put me on non-paid leave at this point, which is tantamount to being fired.
That's outrageous. You have a child, you say, boss, I'm going to have a child. They say, yeah, I don't know. You're not the kind of guy that we hired. We didn't know that you're going to have a baby when we hired you. And now we've got somebody else that kind of likes your job, and you just stay at home for a while.
Essentially, that's what's happened, right? So I applied for paternity leave, which is a legal right in Japan. Men or women are able to take paternity leave up to a year. But my application wasn't approved. It wasn't approved because I didn't have the right documents. I didn't have the domestic
Oh, it wasn't
hospital
approved
issue.
internally, inside Mitsubishi?
That's right.
Okay.
And that's the first step in order to get approval. And I went through a long process in order for it to be approved. It took months. And it was very, very frustrating.
How's your son?
He's doing better, thank you.
But your job is in hiatus. Have you filed a lawsuit? I mean, this is something that really needs to be addressed.
Well, that's right. So we filed with the Tokyo District Court to get my job back. I firmly believe that by me going back to the company, I've got a lot of value to add in terms of not only my job that I have been doing all along for the past 6 years, but in order to help people that are going through similar experiences to myself, as well as to help Mitsubishi Morgan Stanley become a multicultural leader.
You know, I saw your press conference at the Foreign Correspondents Club last week, and since then there's been like 40 different articles in the U.S. and in the foreign language and in the Japanese press touting your issue and how outrageous this is. But isn't this a kind of a microcosm of a larger issue that, in particular, Japanese corporations, the way that they manage and the way that they practice management on their employees is a little bit rough around the edges?
Yes, well, historically, Japan corporations in particular have held on to this remnant of feudalism, which is managed by harassment. And it's just not suitable for the 21st century, and it's not suitable for companies like Mitsubishi Morgan Stanley who want to become global.
Right. I don't really quite catch why they would do this, because it hurts in two ways. Number one, if you want to have a child, you should have a child. I think that's a basic human right. But particularly in the current situation where people aren't having children, you would want to, encourage that sort of thing. But the second thing is that people like you, highly skilled, trained, bringing a skill and a service to Japan, are diminished because you want to have a family, and that's going to scare other people from coming to Japan. I mean, there are lots of other reasons why people might not want to come to Japan, but that's just really adding insult to injury.
Yeah, no, I agree, Timothy, and that's another reason why I'm standing up. As you mentioned, I think it's a basic universal human right for people to be able to have children and continue their career. And with the issues that Japan's facing, this is exactly what they need. And that's why Prime Minister Abe and Governor Koike are focused on this as a major issue, to allow women to have children and get back in the workforce. And this is true for traditional and non-traditional families. There's more than 2 million single-parent households in Japan now. It's a tradition.
Right.
And these people need provisions within the company to be able to have children and continue their career just like everybody else.
You've been here for a long time. You've dedicated a career here, so you obviously love Japan. You love what you do. It seems to me that for Japan to want, especially for Governor Koike, her dream to have Tokyo as a financial center, this just flies in the face of it. I mean, there are so many demerits to coming to Tokyo or to having a career in Tokyo that makes Hong Kong or Singapore that much more attractive. And I had never really been too aware of paternity harassment. I've heard of maternity harassment, but paternity harassment, it was the first time I'd heard of this, and I thought, what a flag that kind of brings all of these issues together.
Yeah, that's right. And there's a huge push by the government, as you mentioned, to increase the number of men that are able to take leave upon the birth of their children. And it's very natural. It helps the women in their jobs to continue their career, but it also is very healthy for the man to be involved more in the household. So as you know the numbers, there's 3% of men currently that take paternity leave, which is extraordinarily small. By 2020, the target is for 13%. By the way, of those 3% that take paternity leave, a very large percentage of them have been harassed, and many of them end up leaving their jobs.
Having been here for a long time myself, I've noticed that particularly in the finance industry, these kinds of violations, these kind of injuries are more pronounced. Maybe a little bit more quiet, but they're more pronounced. Why is that?
I think it's a cultural issue. Traditionally in Japan, the brokerages in particular have very traditional, old-fashioned type of management structures, where it's men who are kind of rough around the edges, who cling to old-fashioned norms, and they're very proud. Women that have babies are pushed out, and likewise, when they found out I was going to be a single father, they were definitely not happy about that.
How about that? There's two sides of this. There's the Mitsubishi Morgan Stanley side, and then there's the Morgan Stanley Mitsubishi side. Would something like this, maybe it's just a bit of a guess, but you know the industry, would something like this occur as frequently or as obviously on the other side of the table as it would in your industry or as in your company?
Absolutely not, Timothy. And it's
Isn't that
extraordinary.
interesting?
Yes, it's extraordinary. You could put a wall between the two, and when you step across the wall from one to the other, you wouldn't even recognize you were in a partnership type of company.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're different companies, obviously, but they share some of the same blood. And as I understand, you're in Mainichi. They are also in Mainichi.
Right next door.
Okay, and the two worlds are so different. The polished floors and glass, glass partitions, and over here on the Mitsubishi side, it's what, rice paper and fudo?
Needless to say, it's a very, very different management style and structure. Mm-hmm. And as the two firms grow closer together, and as you know, Mitsubishi, their stated goal is to become the world's most trusted financial institution. Mm-hmm. I think they can get there, but they've got a long ways to go.
Right.
And they're certainly not going to get there with 20th century management style.
Right. I can't believe that this is something that you've had to go through. You're still living in Japan. You still have your job. You're just on a forced sabbatical, right?
Unpaid, correct.
Unpaid. So how does that work? I mean, either you die on the vine or you go back to Canada. Isn't it kind of cutting you off at the knees?
Putting me in a very precarious position indeed. Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping that both the press as well as the legal system mm-hmm. will recognize this as a major issue, as it is.
This, I'm sorry, just to go back once again, this issue with paternity harassment that you've suffered from, is it like this is a flash in the pan, or is this something that's kind of in the atmosphere that there's other components of this that's a kind of a management style? If we don't like you, we don't fire you, we just kind of crank it so that eventually you want to leave on your own.
Right. So there certainly is a cultural issue here in terms of expectations and how to manage people. Mm-hmm. As you mentioned earlier, the control of people tends to be about public shaming or harassment. And again, that's a remnant of a feudal past, which I firmly believe doesn't belong in 21st century management mm-hmm. and is not going to serve Mitsubishi well going into their global expansion phase.
Well, Mitsubishi is a global company. They can kind of do what they want to do. Even in Japan, I mean, they carry a lot of weight. And they've been able to do stuff like this without, getting too much criticism so far.
That's correct. And that's precisely why I'm standing up. I firmly believe that this is a universal human right that needs to be recognized by even the largest of corporations. And fortunately, at this point in time, we've got Prime Minister Abe who is supporting us in this cause.
Is he? In what way?
He's made it very clear of his goals going forward. As I mentioned, currently 3% of men take paternity leave. He wants to increase that to 13% in 2.5 years' time. It's a huge jump in 2.5 years' time. Further, we've got more than 50% of Japanese corporations that don't have any women in management. They want to increase the current 6% to 30% women in management in Japanese corporations by 2020, 2.5 years' time. So he's made it very clear that he wants ikumen and not ikemen going forward in Japan.
By the way, Glenn, I'm glad you dyed your hair black for today's interview. Is there any suggestion that this is being practiced upon you a little bit more harshly for the fact that you're a foreigner, you're not Japanese? Would the situation have been any different if you were a Japanese fellow who was running global sales for Mitsubishi?
That's a tough question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I guess I would just say that regardless of one's race, regardless of one's gender, regardless of one's family, whether it's traditional or non-traditional, these are human rights. Someone needs, as an individual, as an employee, you need to feel secure in being able to have a family and continue your career. That's the bottom line. If you can't, you're going to run into these issues that Japan's facing in terms of people not having children.
Yeah. The sense I get from it is, you work like a cog. You're supposed to do your job, and that's all you do, and do it hard, and do it as well as you can, and then go to sleep, and then come back and do it some more.
Well, that's why we've got people not having children, right?
Yeah.
So let's turn that around. Give me my job back. Let me help Mitsubishi establish their goal of becoming a global institution that's trusted on a global basis.
A tough fight. One of the issues that Japan faces is in accommodating foreigners who come into Japan to do their work and live their lives, and also to accommodate families to grow here. Please stay tuned.